Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We want to welcome everyone to today's hearing on the Biden border crisis part 2. I'd like to start our proceedings with Mr. Gosar, who's been kind enough to let us come to his great district. Where is Paul? I know I haven't seen.
He's coming.
Where's? Oh, here comes Mr. Gosar. We'd like to ask Congressman Gosar to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would, if you'd all stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Paul, thank you. First, I want to say thanks to the good folks here in Yuma for hosting us. We've had a wonderful 24 hours. I guess it's been 24 hours, Supervisor, seeing all kinds of interesting things. We want to thank you for your hospitality. To the mayor, thank you for the facility and for all your hospitality as well, and our witnesses who will get to you. We talked to Doctor earlier today, and Sheriff, we're glad to have you with us, as well as so many folks from our law enforcement community. It's not easy. It is not easy being in law enforcement today, so we want to thank you all for what you do. And obviously it's even tougher when we're down here on the border and dealing with what we have. It's a shame that not one Democrat member of Congress would join us on this trip despite having weeks of advance notice. It's disappointing, but it's not surprising. In fact, the Democrats have called this a stunt. I would argue it's not a stunt, not what we've. My guess is our witnesses wouldn't call it a stunt. What we've learned today from them, what we've seen last night on the border, but it's disappointing that they're not here. Democrats dismiss the experiences of these real people that we've had a chance to visit with the last 24 hours, people affected by the Biden border crisis, and Democrats seem to believe that solutions can only come from bureaucrats in Washington. We actually think they come from the American people. Democrats were here and saw what we're seeing. Maybe we'd have a chance at ending this crisis and actually securing our southern border. According to Border Patrol agents, last night there were over 200 folks who crossed the border last night. We got to see the unfinished wall. Everyone tells us that walls work, walls help. Every agent we've talked to says that's the case, and yet we saw places where it should have been finished but wasn't. This morning we were at the Yuma Regional Medical Center. We heard from Dr. Trenchell and his great staff about the $26 million in uncompensated care that they've had to administer. Now, they're willing to help everybody, and they do, but it'd be nice to get actually paid for the great work that they do, and some other concerns that they had that impact the residents of this wonderful community. And, of course, we saw the damage. We heard from growers today, the damage that happens to them and the crops in the fields, and a host of other issues that we'll get to, I think, in the course of our hearing this afternoon. But by not being here and seeing firsthand is no excuse for inaction. Numbers don't lie. January's Southwest border encounter number was 156,000, 36% higher than the total number of encounters in January 2021 and January 2020 combined. Let me just say that again. The number of encounters this January, last month, were more than a third higher than the last 2 Januaries of the Trump administration combined. Yet a Biden administration official touted this 156,000 encounter number as the result of, quote, a highly effective border security strategy. Only in Joe Biden's America is over a 5,000 illegal migrants encountered per day on the southwest border a cause to celebrate. Never forget what happened on day one. Day one, January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden said, we're not going to build the wall anymore. We're not going to keep the Remain in Mexico policy, and we're not going to deport any illegal migrants who come in for an immigration violation. So think about that. There's no wall to get over. You won't have to wait in Mexico to have your asylum claim evaluated, and you will not get deported. You'll get to go where you want. Well, it's no wonder so many migrants want to come to the greatest country ever. And that's the situation he had. He's also called on Congress to pass a massive amnesty package. All of these reckless actions let people around the world know that our border is open and the illegal border crossings haven't stopped since that day. Again, numbers don't lie. 4.75 million encounters since Joe Biden's been in office. Nearly 1 million of those have crossed in just the first 4 months of fiscal year 2023. Over 1.89 million illegal aliens encountered along the southwest border have been released into American communities by the Biden administration. 14,700 pounds of fentanyl were seized by Custom and Border Protection officials during fiscal year 2022. 12,500 pounds of fentanyl seized by Customs and Border officials just in the first 4 months of this fiscal year. Americans are dying as a direct result of President Biden's open border policies. It's a shame that the Democrats did not join us today in Yuma. They would have learned a thing or two. They could have heard from the farmers and landowners and the growers that I talked about earlier. They would have seen how overrun the hospital is with illegal migrants and the cost to our healthcare institution here in Yuma. They would have heard directly from the people here in Yuma who live President Biden's border crisis each and every day. Instead, they've accused us of political grandstanding because we're here trying to hear from real people outside of Washington, D.C. Why don't Democrats want to hear from local law enforcement? Why don't Democrats want to talk to hospital administrators? Why can't Democrats be bothered to hear how fentanyl continues to kill tens of thousands of people in communities all across this great country? I think we know why. It's because Democrats' open border policies caused this crisis, and rather than choosing to do anything to fix it, they want to call it a stunt, and they want to play political games. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I hope we can discuss what Congress can do to help fix this problem. With that, I would like to recognize our subcommittee chairman. There he is, Mr. McClintock. Our subcommittee chairman on the issue of immigration, Tom McClintock from the great state of California. Mr. McClintock's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the morning of Inauguration Day, 2021, illegal immigration had slowed to a trickle, and our borders were finally secure for the first time in decades. The border wall was nearing completion. The Remain in Mexico policy had all but stopped phony asylum claims, and ICE was actually enforcing court-ordered deportations. By the afternoon of that same day, Joe Biden had reversed these successful policies and initiated an unprecedented illegal mass migration on a scale that no civilization in history has ever survived. Since that afternoon, this administration has deliberately admitted into the interior of our country 1.9 million illegal immigrants, 600,000 of whom have not even been given notices to appear in court. While the Border Patrol has been overwhelmed, changing diapers and taking names, another 1.2 million known gotaways have entered our country as well. So that totals 3.1 million illegal immigrants who've been allowed into our country to violate our borders and demand billions of dollars of taxpayer resources that were supposed to be helping Americans. 3.1 million is a population larger than the entire state of Arkansas, a state that has 7 congressional districts. And that's just in the last 25 months. The vast proportion of these people are homeless, impoverished, and desperate. Gallup warned us last year that there are 42 million people living in poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean alone who intend to come here now that they can, and they are. There's no question that this policy is deliberate and calculated. For 2 years, we couldn't get the Democrats to hold a single hearing on this crisis, not one. In the first 6 weeks of this session, Republicans have held 2. And we've come to the border today to ask the people who are at ground zero to tell us of their experiences, and not a single Democrat on this committee has bothered to show up to listen. If not already affected, every American soon will be, because every community will soon face the practical effects of this collapsed border. We have to ask ourselves, how does it make our schools better to pack classrooms with non-English speaking students? How does it make our hospitals more accessible by flooding emergency rooms with illegals demanding care? How does it strengthen our social safety net by adding millions of impoverished individuals to a system that's already strained to the breaking point? How does it make our children safer with fentanyl flooding our neighborhoods and killing nearly 300 Americans a day? How does it make our communities safer to introduce violent cartels into them and make it all but impossible to deport criminal illegal aliens? How does it help working Americans to undercut them by flooding the labor market with cheap, illegal labor? We are here today to listen to our fellow Americans who live with the full impact of this new and lawless age, one that's rapidly making its way to every town and every neighborhood in the country. On my last trip to Yuma this past fall, I asked rank-and-file Border Patrol officers what laws they needed us to write to do their jobs. To a person, every one of them said the same thing. We don't need new laws. We need to enforce our existing laws. When President Trump faithfully executed those laws, our borders were secure. But there's still much that can be done legislatively to assure this never happens again. The law requires every asylum claimant to be detained until their case is adjudicated. We need a Title 42 type mechanism to assure that we have the capacity to enforce this law. Credible fear standards need to be tightened to prevent the admission of anyone who has a criminal record or who has passed through a safe country. Unaccompanied minors need to be returned safely to their own homes immediately. E-Verify should be required to streamline compliance with the law that protects Americans' jobs. The current abuses of parole authority must be stopped. Well, the two parties are far, far apart on this issue, as evidenced by the lack of any interest by the Democrats on this committee today to even address the crisis or listen to the people who've been directly affected by it. And the trust gap is also immense. If this administration refuses to enforce existing laws, why would anyone trust it to enforce future laws? But this won't stop us from trying. That's why we're here today. But I'm afraid that this is going to get worse until the American people demand that these policies be reversed. History is screaming this warning at us. Countries that cannot or will not enforce their borders simply aren't around very long. We can't and we won't let that become the epitaph of the American Republic. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Well said. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I want to introduce, we have three great witnesses today who are, and I want to introduce them, who are here to give us the facts, to give us the truth. Not here to complain. Complaining doesn't solve it. What's the old great football coach Lou Holtz said that, stop complaining about your problems. 90% of the people don't care and 10% are glad you got them, right? Remember? That is not what this panel is about. These are folks who want to give us the facts and the truth from here on the ground on the front lines. And we welcome them being here today. Mr. Jonathan Lyons has served as District 2 Yuma County Supervisor for 2 years. A previous chairman of the Republican Party of Arizona, he is now a member of the Arizona-Mexico Commission, serves as vice chair of the new Water Infrastructure and Finance Authority for Arizona, and of course, as you all know, is a small business owner here in this community. The Honorable Leon Wilmot, Sheriff Wilmot has served in law enforcement in Yuma, Arizona for 38 years. This is our second hearing, and this is the second hearing where we've had a sheriff from this great state. We had Sheriff Daniels a few weeks ago up in Washington, D.C., and it's interesting. I think he's served 28 or 38. I think you've served 38 years, and currently serving in his third term as Sheriff of Yuma County. He's a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for that service, too. And serves as the Executive Committee on the National Sheriff's Association. And, of course, our third witness is Dr. Robert Trenchel. He's President and CEO of the Yuma Regional Medical Center, where we spent the morning. Amazing facility. He has nearly 20 years of experience in senior management of medical care, graduated from the medical school at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is dear to my colleague's heart here from the great state of Florida, and was in private practice from 1990 until 2000. Dr. Trenchel holds a master's degree in public health from Florida International University in Miami, Florida. We want to welcome all three of our witnesses and thank them for appearing here today. And as I said earlier, I also want to welcome several Arizona sheriffs. Now, I'm not sure if I got everyone's list, but I'm going to go on my list, and if I didn't get you, I want you to stand up and tell us who you are. And I want to make sure I pronounce these. La Paz. Did I say that county right?
La Paz.
La Paz. Okay, County Sheriff. That's what a Buckeye does when he gets to Arizona. Sheriff William Ponce and Chief Deputy David Gray. Are they here? Oh, right there. There we go. Right. Thank you. Thank you. Pinal County Sheriff Mark. Did I get that one right? Pinal. You got to help me, yeah, Biggs. What the heck?
It's Pinal County, brother.
Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb and Chief Deputy Matthew Thomas, thank you as well. Cochise County, I got that one right. Cochise County, Mark Daniels, because that's because I had that before. He was there 2 weeks ago, but I know Mark couldn't make it, but he was there in D.C. Graham County Sheriff Preston Allred, yeah. Gila County, thanks for the help. That's Gila County Sheriff Adam Shepard. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you. Yavapai. Wow. Yavapai. I would have never got that one. Sheriff David Rhodes, thank you as well. Navajo. I would have got the last one. Navajo. Sheriff David Klaus, thank you as well for being here. God bless you all. We will begin by swearing in our witnesses. If you'd all stand, raise your right hand. Our three witnesses here. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Yes. Let the record show that each witness answered in the affirmative. We're going to give you 5 minutes. You guys can be seated. We'll start with Dr. Trenchel, and we'll go right down the line, 5 minutes, and then the sheriff, and then Mr. Lyons, and yeah, pass that microphone. I'll give you a little light tap with the gavel when you get to about 4.5 minutes. But we're going to be, we're amongst friends here. If you got to go a little longer than 5.5 minutes, that'd be fine too. So, Doctor, you're recognizing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Jordan and members of the committee. I'm Dr. Robert Trenchel, President and CEO of Yuma Regional Medical Center, and thank you for being here in person today to get a firsthand account of the impact that open borders have had on our hospital and community over the past year and more. I've been in Yuma for close to 8 years. As CEO, and I bring over 30 years of experience in healthcare administration, Yuma Regional Medical Center is a 406-bed hospital that offers a full range of acute care services. The closest hospitals that do what we do are located 180 miles away in Phoenix or San Diego. Given our geographic location, our hospital and health system holds a deep responsibility of keeping local families close to home for care whenever possible. For many who live here, traveling out of town for care is simply an unbearable challenge. They depend on us to be here. Our mission to meet the needs of the community is always in the forefront of every decision. I also want to acknowledge the work and heart of our staff at Yuma Regional Medical Center, who continue to work and care for patients each and every day. They provide the same high level of care for every patient. We do not treat anyone differently, and we take pride in that. If your mother or grandchild walks through our doors, or if a migrant walks through our doors, they will receive the same level of care. We've had a significant increase in the number of migrants crossing the border into our community. Our hospital saw an increase in the number of migrants seeking care beginning late fall, early winter of 21. They arrived to our hospital emergency room in a multitude of ways. Some patients come to us via Border Patrol, who typically release them from custody upon arrival. Other patients walk in, take taxis. Some even come by Uber. As I've said, we're the only acute care hospital in the area, which means diversion to another facility is not an option. We are it. Some migrants come to us with minor ailments, but many come in with significant disease. We've had migrant patients on dialysis, cardiac catheterization, and in need of heart surgery. Many are very sick. They have long-term complications of chronic disease that have not been cared for. Some end up in the ICU for 60 days or more. One of the largest cohorts we have seen are maternity patients who present with little or no prenatal care. These higher risk pregnancies and births result in higher complication rates and longer hospital stays. Due to a lack of prenatal care, many of these babies require a stay in our neonatal intensive care unit, some for a month or more at a time. There are language and cultural concerns with migrant patients. We work through those, but when you consider the volume and associated case management that comes with it, resources have to support this as well. Migrants often require 3 times the amount of human resources to resolve their cases and provide them with a safe discharge as defined by CMS. That effort includes assisting in locating families, making sure they have a safe place to go when they are discharged, arranging and sometimes purchasing durable medical equipment when needed. We have paid for emergency air transport when they need a higher level of care, hotel rooms, taxis, and car seats. We do all these things because it's the right thing to do from a humanitarian perspective, but it also allows us to open up a hospital bed sooner for another patient in our community. None of these expenses are included in the $26 million figure. Our reality is this. We have delivered over $26 million in uncompensated care to these individuals in the 12-month period from December 21 to November 22. That's an auditable figure. Let me assure you this is not an approximation. That number comes from a detailed review of unpaid patient bills directly attributed attributed to migrant patients. $26 million in uncompensated care is simply not a sustainable business model. While this is a huge number that we have validated, the point is that any number is not acceptable. It is an unsustainable model to have a hospital like ours bear the entire burden of paying for migrant health care. No business or service can survive ongoing large-scale expenses without any offsetting revenue. Because of this surge in migrant care, we've had to hire additional staff at a time when healthcare labor post-pandemic is higher than ever. Every dollar in uncompensated care has a direct impact on our hospital. Migrant patients are receiving free care. They have no ability to pay. We have no ability to bill anyone. We don't know their final destination. We don't know anything about them. We cannot provide completely free care to the residents of our community, so the situation is simply not fair and understandably concerning to them. Let me put this into perspective. $26 million is equal to the salary and benefits to support 212 bedside nurses. The city of Yuma has 100,000 people, and we've had over 300,000 people cross the border here. That's 3 times the population of Yuma coming across the border. We're the only hospital within a 3-hour radius, which means they come here. We've contacted our state and federal leaders, and no one has a solution. They are willing to listen and are empathetic to our situation, but so far we have no solutions or reimbursement for the care. We've been at this for well over a year now. On behalf of our entire healthcare team, I'm here seeking your leadership support to find a payer source for the care we have already provided and will continue to provide in the future, and to put long-term solutions into action that will support our daily commitment to be here for our community for years to come. One hospital should not and cannot bear the health care costs of a national migrant problem that is deeply impacting Arizona and our community. We need a revenue source for the patient population so we can sustainably provide high-quality care to all comers and remain viable for the future.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate your being with us and your testimony. Sheriff, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Yeah, pull that nice and close, and everyone in the room will be able to hear you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman Jim Jordan and distinguished members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to address this committee regarding the status of our southern border from the perspective of our community and local law enforcement. I've served our border community for over 38 years with the Yuma County Sheriff's Office, and prior to that as a member of our military, serving in the United States Marine Corps, stationed here at MCAS Yuma, located within Yuma County. I've always been a genuine believer in my oath of office to protect my country, and now Yuma County is a duly elected sheriff for the past 11 years. I'm an active member of the Arizona Sheriff's Association, currently serve as an executive committee member for National Sheriffs. I'm board member and past chairman of National Sheriff's Association Border Security Committee, executive board member of Western State Sheriff's Association, and an active member and past chairman of the Southwestern Border Sheriffs Coalition. All these associations share 3 objectives: public safety, national security, and addressing humanitarian issues in our communities. In my submitted brief, I have shared with you all an overview of Yuma County and the history of our border. I have personally experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a border county. Unfortunately, my office has always had to deal with border-related crimes, death investigations, and the smuggling of illicit drugs, humans, weapons, and cash by our transnational organizations, the cartels. I am proud of our relationship with our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners that serve our communities. I do want to take this opportunity to thank our Customs and Border Patrol officers and agents who have worked tirelessly and diligently to protect this great nation. And I also want to thank all my fellow sheriffs that stand united for the rule of law and the protection of their communities. And finally, I want to thank my constituents for their patience and support in a time of crisis and disarray. To best understand my presentation, you need to understand where we were 2 years ago. My county was one of the safest border communities and counties based on our collective governmental efforts, messaging, and yes, delivering 100% consequence delivery and enforcement efforts against the criminal element supported by the rule of law. Apprehensions by Border Patrol were an average of roughly 40 a day. When the policies of this administration changed, our federal agents immediately averaged 200 a day, then 400 a day, to over 1,000 a day in apprehensions along the river corridor. Wow. The citizens of Yuma County and law enforcement face a huge migrant crisis along the river corridor. Last federal fiscal year, you've heard, there were 310,000 give-ups, So far this federal fiscal year, we are currently at 93,000 in Yuma County. We had 28,000 known gotaways last federal fiscal year in the east part of our county alone, and so far 5,000 this federal fiscal year. Yuma County is an agricultural community supplying 90% of the winter leafy greens to the whole of the United States during the winter season. Because of the proximity of the fields to the river corridor, it's visually an environmental disaster on the river area ecosystem with the tons of trash, pharmaceuticals, and biological waste being left by those crossing the river illegally. Yuma County Emergency Management alone has had to budget and general fund dollars to lease porta-johns to put down by the river corridor to prevent the defecation in the fields. The price tag for migrants being illegally smuggled by the cartels begins at roughly $6,000 per person and up to $15,000 depending on what country they are coming from. These smugglers include juveniles being recruited via social media by the cartels to smuggle not only humans and narcotics into Yuma County. Children are also the pawns on the cartel's money-making schemes. Roughly 400 to 800 juveniles cross our border every day to go to school in Yuma County. The cartels use them to body conceal and carry narcotics across and tell them that the federal government will not charge a juvenile for smuggling, so you don't have to worry about being arrested. Border-related bookings of undocumented immigrants committing state crimes in Yuma County has cost us in federal fiscal year 21 $440,000 and last fiscal year over $300,000. These charges included sexual exploitation of minors, narcotics, assaults, kidnappings, burglary, and theft cases. And of recent, we have one smuggler that was caught and is being charged by our agency for committing murder on another individual he was smuggling into this country. All of this is borne on our local taxpayers' dollar. Our federal partners across the southwest border made 40,000 arrests of individuals with criminal convictions or individuals that were apprehended and wanted by local law enforcement. In 2021, over 5 million dosages of fentanyl were seized on the Arizona border, and in 2022, over 12,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized on the southwest border. From a local perspective, there were 50 overdose deaths between 2021 and 2022 in Yuma County. We've also had to encounter 700 plus deaths in the desert along the southwest border as a whole. In 2021, our agency investigated 30 of those. In 2022, we investigated 70 deaths just in Yuma County's desert. In 2021, 1,821 encounters by my officers with individuals that were smuggled into Yuma. In 2022, my officers encountered over 4,600 who were being smuggled into the United States, into our county. We've had to handle over 750 911 calls through our dispatch center on and above the ones that Border Patrol gets from migrants wanting to be rescued out in the remote deserts of our county. In 2021, I authorized an effort to identify and combat the influx of illegal monies into Yuma County. Ensuring effort resulted in the discovery of the use of local banking institutions to move monies from the United States into Mexico. In the 4-month period of September 2021 to January 2022, 2 people and 1 business moved over $600,000 from U.S. banks into Mexico. In the 2-month period between April and June of 2021, 1 business moved over $300,000 alone. As the initiative has expanded and matured in 2022, 3 people were discovered to have moved about $1.6 million in a 10-month period, in addition to another estimated $950,000 from other accounts in a 4-month period, for an estimated total of over $2.5. Our initiative continues in the latter part of 2022. 11 individuals were identified in Yuma County as moving roughly over $3 million between the U.S. and Mexico in a 3-month period, and 1 company was identified as moving $1.9 million in a 90-day period.
Sheriff, we're going to, if you can, we got your written testimony, so maybe just if you could just finish up, and then we'll. But we got your written testimony has been given out to every member, and then we can get to supervisor lines. But go ahead and finish up if you can.
I will cut mine short, and I will leave you with this final statement. We all serve the priorities of Americans based on our shared oaths of office to keep them safe, enhance their quality of life, and support the rule of law, absent political affiliation or the concern of re-election. I ask each one of you today to reflect on this statement as you serve those that placed you into the office of trust. Once again, I thank this committee for the invitation and the opportunity to provide testimony.
Sheriff, thank you. And very interesting numbers, and the financial dealings that you've uncovered too. The stuff going on there is something new that I don't know if the committees had seen much of before. But thank you so much, Supervisor Lines. Thank you. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, members of the Congressional Judiciary Committee, thank you for being here. For many of you, Mr. Gates, Mr. Biggs, and my Congressman, Mr. Gosard, they've been here multiple times, as well as Mr. McClintock. So thank you for taking a personal interest in some of the challenges that we have here along our border. And for many of the freshmen that just came into office, congratulations, and hopefully you can come back to discuss other things like great weather. Except for yesterday, we noted. I'd like to welcome you to the most patriotic community in Arizona as declared by Insurify. I serve my community in many different capacities as a county supervisor and sitting on boards like the Yuma Community Food Bank, Amberley's Place, and through service organizations. Yuma has been my family's home since the 1930s and Arizona our state since the 1870s, prior to statehood. Here's where we choose to carve out an existence in the desert. I am sad to be before you today to discuss the failures of the Biden administration on the southwest border in the Yuma sector. Since the first days of this administration, we have seen a significant deterioration in border security despite the massive efforts from the men and women who have been working tirelessly to secure the border to safeguard our national security. Since President Biden took office, we saw a huge surge, a record number of people crossing illegally from 106 different countries. 17 of those countries are designated as special interest because of the negative relationship with the United States and a desire to do harm. And it has steadily continued these many months. Along with illegal entry into the United States across an open border, the increase in trafficking of narcotics, both human trafficking and drug trafficking, remain at an all-time high, significantly greater than any other administration in our history. In addition to the known give-ups, we are extremely concerned about the backgrounds and intentions of the gotaways, the 1.2 million as noted, those who evade law enforcement entering the United States illegally, who are not willing to give themselves into the custody of Border Patrol for processing. These are estimated to exceed the 1.2 million since Biden took office. I've had many opportunities to visit with the border from elected officials from all over the United States, and the message they have shared with me is that this is not just a Yuma, Arizona problem, but that illegal entry, human trafficking, and narcotics, especially fentanyl and methamphetamines, has now compounded and pervaded across the United States to affect every community across our nation, now making them too into border communities. These leaders stood with us in asking the president to fulfill his commitment through Secretary Mayorkas at his visit last year, who had pledged to Mayor Nichols and myself to close the Yuma gaps in the border wall and provide financial support, safety, and security for the men and women who are on the front lines battling a very porous border, which support has yet to materialize from the executive branch. Today you'll have the opportunity, as you have, to hear testimony. And I thought I was going to go first, so I have to change this a little bit.
Okay.
You've heard their testimony, and now you'll have the opportunity to ask them questions. Last week, we learned that the average number of people who entered illegally across the Yuma sector is now percolating up at 2,500 a week. Prior to that number was 5,000 to 6,000 per week, and yet at the same time, fentanyl, methamphetamines, and cocaine seizures were up between 200% and 400% because the men and women in uniform were able to direct their attention and efforts to border security and national security. Fentanyl is the scourge of our nation. It's being shipped from Mexico to Mexico from China in conjunction with the cartels, is being marketed and sold to children through social media apps. These stories are tragic when parents talk about the loss of life of their sons and daughters due to fentanyl and opioids. My hope today through this hearing is that we can shed light on the challenge we face as a small community, as well as to remind the nation, like many elected officials have done after coming to see for themselves, that every community in the United States is now a border community due to an abject failure by this administration to control and stem the tide of illegal entry along the southwest border and to commit to take back control of the border from the cartels. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Now I want to go to one of the experts in the United States Congress on this issue and done so much to bring its attention to colleagues in the Congress and folks around the country. The gentleman from Arizona, Congressman Biggs, is recognized for 5 minutes of question.
I thank the chairman, and I appreciate being here in Yuma, where there's always a very hospitable group of people that greet us, and I'm grateful for that. It's reflective of the unity of this community and how great you are. And we have we just heard from 3 great witnesses, and I also tip my hat today to the officers and agents of CBP and law enforcement. We recognize the challenges that you have, and I'm going to try to first undercut a narrative that our colleagues across the aisle raise, and they say that they'll tell you that 90% of fentanyl is seized at the border, at the port of entry, right? Port of entry. As if there is not a massive amount of fentanyl and other drugs coming between the ports of entry. So I'm going to ask the panel, why do you suppose that we are more successful at interdicting drug smuggling at a port of entry that has, I don't know, dogs, x-ray machines, material, and more agents than we would be between ports of entry? Mr. Lyons, you look like you're just chomping at the bit to answer that question.
No, the sheriff winked at me and told me to go.
So very good, please.
Mr. Biggs, Congressman Biggs, thank you for the opportunity. We learned last week, and this number we made public towards the end of the month, but the narrative of 90% coming through the ports has been changed a little bit in that because of the downturn over the January timeframe, 48% of the fentanyl is being intercepted between the ports and 52% at the ports. To combat that narrative, Border Patrol has now had the opportunity, because they're not spending 1.5, 1.7 hours processing each individual. And so they are now on the border being able to provide national security and border security.
Sheriff, do you want to add on that?
I would just confirm what Jonathan Lyons just said.
Thank you.
With our agents being able to get back out in the field, it's helped us intercept that.
Thank you. And Sheriff, I'm going to ask you a question. You mentioned juvenile drug smuggling. Juveniles being used and exploited to smuggle drugs coming across, who have legal purpose to enter the country, their legal authority to enter the country through the port of entry. Please tell us about that.
That's correct. When we speak with our port of entry personnel, they are the ones that typically are the screeners when juveniles come across from Mexico to go to school each and every day. The cartels exploit them by asking them to carry fentanyl and other narcotics across the border when they're walking into the United States. These individuals are then apprehended by port of entry personnel, who then get a hold of DEA or the local narcotics task force, and then they end up getting charged as an adult because of the amount of narcotics that they have in their possession.
Thank you. I'm going to make a quick statement and then try to get time to get to Dr. Trenchel to ask him a question too. There's just so much. This is an incredibly broad topic. The violation of laws of this administration. I'm going to point out 4 quick things. They've changed the parole law. They haven't changed it. They are violating the parole law. The parole authority typically would be a case-by-case basis, 12 to 20 people a year per year until the Biden administration came in. Last year, more than 300,000 people received parole. And there's a promise of 360,000 more people this year from 4 different countries: Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. That's one violation. The second is the no deport. One of you mentioned the no deportation law. More than 1.2 million individuals have received due process and an order of removal because their asylum claim was bogus, found to be bogus by a court. This administration has forbidden ICE to pursue, look, and deport. The third thing is the violation of the First Safe Nation international law. That's another reference to the Remain in Mexico policy. If you had the First Safe Nation law and you enforced the First Safe Nation law, which we did under the Remain in Mexico policy, Yuma sector, the last year of the Trump administration, had fewer than 9,000 encounters. Last year, well over 300,000 encounters. That's the third thing. And so I will just leave it there so I can ask Dr. Dr. Trenchel, this last question, because you said something that I think every American needs to hear. You are actually expending hospital funds, community hospital funds, to actually move people to family members or elsewhere around the country. And there are many that you are sending that you don't even know their destination. Please expand on that and tell us what that looks like.
Sure. So we've, when a patient comes into the hospital, we have to provide them with a safe discharge per CMS, and we do that. So a lot of that includes tracking down their family members. We've had to fly them to their families. We've had to air ambulance individuals for higher levels of care. And we've just had to durable medical equipment, wheelchairs, walkers, all these other items that we have to provide for patients for a safe discharge.
And you're not being compensated by the federal government or anyone else, and these individuals are not those that have been brought for medical treatment by CBP through some kind of legal mechanism.
Correct. Some individuals may have walked in, declared themselves a migrant, and we treat those. They could have come in by taxi. They could have come in by any means. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. I'll yield back.
Thanks for all your good work. Chairman of the Subcommittee on Immigration, the gentleman from California, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Trenchel, you said that your hospital has incurred $26 million in uncompensated care over the past year. Obviously, that money doesn't come from nowhere. It comes out of what you'd otherwise be spending. So does this mean that there's $26 million less equipment for your patients, $26 million less staff to care for them?
It does. That extra revenue that we would have brought in would have gone back into the community, and we do that as a nonprofit. So it would have been either to purchase equipment, have additional access ports for patients here, bring in additional physicians. It would have been used for the benefit of our community, for sure.
Now, you say you serve all patients equally, but it is a zero-sum equation, isn't it? A bed that's taken by one person is not going to be available for another. An hour of a doctor's time on one person is not going to be available to care for another. So if your emergency room, for example, is packed with illegal immigrants, doesn't that mean, just as a simple mathematical equation, that legal residents must wait exactly that much longer for care?
Yes, it does. That's very true. We've had that experience in our emergency room. We've had that experience with patients who've had to delay elective surgery because other urgent migrant patients have come in who needed emergent surgery. We've had to delay maternity patients with planned inductions because we've simply been out of space in our maternity unit with migrant patients who've had deliveries, many of them just coming in at the same time for deliveries.
Now, of course, virtually all of these migrants don't stay here. Where do they go?
We don't know where they go. Some may go to Florida. They really go everywhere. We don't know.
So this is going to be impacting every hospital in the country.
Yes.
Sheriff Wilmot, are Mexican cartels operating in Yuma County today?
There is a cartel. There is a cartel influence in Yuma County. We have two states in Mexico that border Yuma County. We have the Baja California, which is the Sinaloa cartel in Sonora.
So what are they doing on this side of the border? What are the cartels doing on this side of the border?
Well, they're the ones that are orchestrating the smuggling of narcotics and humans towards the east part of the county.
What are your greatest concerns for public safety from their activity here?
Well, obviously, first concern is the loss of life and the impact on our local communities. It's also the fact that when we have that many getaways, and we know how many countries have actually come through Yuma County, those also being special interest countries, what is this country going to expect to happen of these unknown individuals coming into the United States? Where are they going, and what is their intentions?
Could we expect to see the kind of violent cartel gun battles in our cities that we're now seeing in Mexico?
We have seen victims of that come into our county as well as other counties along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Is it just a matter of time before we see the same things here?
I believe they've already seen it in other states.
As we saw it in Tulare County in California just a few weeks ago. What's your warning to other communities from what you've experienced here?
We've been trying to warn other communities for the past couple years. in regards to the activities that we're seeing here. It's not staying in the border, it's going across the nation, and I don't think you'll find a sheriff now throughout the United States that doesn't say that they're actually now a border county because of what the impacts they've had in their communities.
I thank the gentleman. Now yield to the gentleman from Florida, my friend, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Chairman, I observe that the people of Yuma are good folks, and they deserve a lot better from the federal government than they have been getting. And whether or not they'll get it depends heavily on the House of Representatives, and particularly this group, and whether or not we will fight for them. We don't have a single Democrat that we could even convince to come to this briefing to get evidence from these experts. You think we're going to get President Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer to pass legislation without a fight, without demanding that it go in must-pass bills, and we have to use every bit of leverage, or this is a deeply unserious exercise. Now, Dr. Trenchel, about 1 in 4 of the migrants who use birthing services at your hospital need neonatal intensive care unit services, NICU, right?
That is true, yes.
And that rate, 1 in 4, is way higher than with the non-migrant population, right?
Very much higher,
And you got about 20 beds at any given time.
Correct.
And they fill up sometimes, don't they?
Yes,
and
they
so
do.
when you have those beds that are full up because of the pressure of these migrant communities, where do you have to send the residents of Yuma when they have a baby that needs NICU?
We would have to fly them to Phoenix or another venue.
And that's 170 miles away.
Yes, it is.
There are few prayers that I have ever seen more sincere and deeper than the prayers of parents when their little babies are at the NICU. And for all the folks on the left who want to lecture to us about how humane an open border is, there is nothing humane about putting a parent on a 170-mile journey when they need NICU services. Supervisor Lyons, we hear Secretary Mayorkas come to us all the time on the Judiciary Committee and testify that the most important partnerships above all else for the Department of Homeland Security are the partnerships with local officials. We hear it time and again. And so here is my simple question for you. Has Secretary Mayorkas ever lied to you?
Yes.
And what was the substance of that lie?
So the mayor and I had the opportunity to visit with Secretary Mayorkas and the Yuma sector chief, as well as the chief of the entire Border Patrol at sector headquarters almost a year ago. And during that meeting, he committed to, after reviewing the border, both from the ground and the air, to specifically address, quote unquote, 9 of the 11 Yuma gaps.
And how many of those gaps have been addressed?
To date so far, none. We see infrastructure on 2, and yet they will not deter anyone.
Yeah. This is my 4th time here with you. I think
Yes,
if I
sir.
come any more often, I'm going to be eligible to vote in Yuma.
Thank you for coming back, Matt.
But in these
District 2 is
circumstances, it seems as though it's not a great mystery where the pressure points are, where we have gaps in the wall, and where we have recalcitrant tribes. And so in those circumstances, should we observe that this is a lack of capability or a lack of will to go and plug those holes?
A lack of will. We've followed up multiple times, as well as Yuma Sector Border Patrol staff and with undersecretaries, and we were told time and time again that they were issuing contracts, that we would have it no later than June of last year, then no later than September, then no later than November. Every time it kept getting pushed out.
So would a reasonable person observe that this is on purpose?
My wife says I'm not a very patient person, but I was patient every time that I called, and they continued to push this process out. It's not reasonable.
Well, the American people are losing their patience. We ought to be losing ours. And while we greatly appreciate the 3 of you being here to answer our questions, the day will come soon when Secretary Mayorkas has to come and answer our questions. And to my colleagues, if he'll lie to Mr. Lyons and lie to the community here, then he will lie to us and he will lie to the American people. And that's why I'm very proud to co-sponsor Representative Biggs' articles of impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas, because this is not a lack of ability, it is a lack of will. Mr. Lyons, I'll give you the last word.
Mr. Gates, thank you very much. And to what Mr. McClintock was saying, as far as the cartel violence, over the last 14 months, the sheriff and I have been made aware of over 200 assassinations in San Luis Rio, Colorado, where the cartels are targeting law enforcement. This last weekend, we had another officer shot, and then retribution the following night. So when you talk about that violence, it's here at our border. They are in control, and we want to take our control, our border control back. And we need an administration that has the will to secure our borders, and that's what we're asking you to do. And I thank you very much for being here.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. Now I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you very much. Let me follow up on that. Sheriff, do you believe the United States government has control of the border here with Mexico?
I believe that we are trying, and our Border Patrol partners are trying very hard. But the cartels are the ones that are creating the narrative and controlling the activities all along the 2,000 miles of international boundary.
Do you have the ability to identify migrants who are inadmissible to the United States for criminal reasons or prior deportations?
We do not have access to that.
Is ICE or CBP actively assisting you in processing the migrants in your charge?
In the law enforcement aspect, we work with them quite a bit in regards to those that are in my jail. As far as the immigration side, that is something that is not in our wheelhouse. I can tell you that because of their constraints, that I've actually cross-deputized our federal partners in the different entities to be able to seek state charges against individuals that the U.S. Attorney would not charge for crimes.
Have you had, say that last part again.
The part in regards to the United States Attorney not wanting to charge an individual for a crime, then I've cross-deputized them so they could take that case to a county attorney to get prosecution.
Have you had any detainers issued by ICE for migrants in your facilities?
Yes, I have.
That's something we need.
As a result of the illegal migration coming across our border, are they harming the environment?
Absolutely. The vast amount of trash, pharmaceuticals, garbage, clothing that's being dumped along our river corridor has been astronomical, and the impacts for our farmers in their fields as well.
When we had a hearing just a couple weeks ago, we had a Judge Samaniego from, I believe, El Paso and Sheriff Daniels on the panel, and they had very divergent statements to say in regards to fentanyl, that the reason for fentanyl, the expansion of its use in our country and the devastating consequences, was not because of the border being open. That was the case being made by Judge Samaniego. Sheriff Daniels said that it is a result of the borders being opened over the last couple of years that fentanyl use and its migration into the United States has gone up exponentially. Who's correct?
I would tend to support Sheriff Daniels' statement in regards to that. And I would agree with his statement as well.
So are you saying you've seen the same thing as Sheriff Daniels in Cochise County?
We have seen the same type of activity where individuals were recruited to come and pick up individuals that had entered this country illegally between a port of entry and come to pick them up because it's a money-making adventure. And they've also been found to be in possession of narcotics, too, at the same time.
Has Secretary Mayorkas secured the border?
No.
I just have one further question and a final statement, Mr. Chairman. To Dr. Trenchel, do any of the NGOs out there, non-governmental organizations, have they compensated you for any of the uncompensated care that you're providing for migrants?
No, they have not. We've not received any compensation from anyone.
Thank you. I'm just going to close with this. You know, folks, set aside, we've had the most number of people that are on the terror watch come across our border in the last couple of years in the history of the United States of America. You can set aside the human trafficking. You have the largest, your United States government via the Biden administration is running perhaps the largest human trafficking or complicit in perhaps the greatest, biggest human trafficking operation in the history of the world, along with the cartels, along with the International Organization of Migration, a United Nations outfit, and others. Set those things aside. Just fentanyl alone should be a national emergency in America, and I can't believe we do not have colleagues on the other side of the aisle that are not here today, and even if they're not here today, that are not calling for the same thing that we're calling for. At a minimum, secure the border to stop the fentanyl, or at least reduce the amount of fentanyl coming into America that has made every state, including my state of Wisconsin, a border state. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. Well done. I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
That does it. I sit up here and I wonder what you must be thinking who are here kind enough to spend your time watching us today. And you must be troubled that only one of the major parties is here. You must be discouraged as you ponder what it would take for the federal government to fix this problem. I appreciate your hospitality and your interest, and I love everything I've seen about Yuma. How many fentanyl deaths in Yuma this year, Supervisor Lyons, in the past year?
Mr. Bishop, I was just able to submit data that I acquired from the hospital. That number continues to increase. You know, the average nationwide is 1 in 100,000, and yet we've had 16 fatalities directly attributable to fentanyl, so more than 16 times the national average.
How many ODs?
16. Well, there were 117 overdoses, and 16 of those were
16
fatals.
deaths, right? So you're way above the national average in that key thing. You know, you made a point earlier that this is very interesting because a lot of our colleagues in Washington say over and over and over again that the uncontrolled immigration between ports of entry really doesn't contribute to the illicit drugs because they come through the ports of entry. You've touched on that already, and you've said your data that Border Patrol's furnished to you is that about half, I hope everybody's listening in Washington, about half of the seizures are occurring between ports of entry.
Yes, sir.
Means it is coming from this uncontrolled problem. And yet, you know, we have colleagues that Katie Porter said at a hearing. She's a Democrat from California. She said last week at a hearing, we had a change in president in 2020 and some changes in border policy. And what we can see here is that the facts show we are seizing a lot more fentanyl. And for me, as a mom, that is a sign of success. I don't even know what to say about that. Border Chief Raul Ortiz said a couple of weeks ago, put a tweet out that said that Yuma, so far in fiscal year 23, we have seized over 476 pounds of fentanyl between ports of entry along our southwest border. That's enough to kill 100 million people. I'd say that's a problem even that Washington should be able to recognize. I want to use my remaining time, Supervisor Lyons, I hope you won't be offended. I was taken with a moment of conversation between you and me at the lunch before we came in here. I hope you won't mind my sharing it with the committee and with those attending, because for me it connects to the issue that we're grappling with. You and your wife have 11 children, and with 3 remaining at home, your wife has undertaken developing subdivisions.
Yes, she has.
You have 4 grandchildren. Your children are hardworking and productive. And yet you've made time not only to serve in office, but as a charitable leader, particularly as a chairman of the food bank, not only reckon with the awesome task of figuring out how to provide for 11 children, but you've produced and served in a way to demonstrate just how constructive and productive human lives can be. And as extraordinary as your story is, I would say that, and I don't articulate it to single you out, but to recognize that the law enforcement officers who are sitting next to and behind you, and the healthcare professionals like Dr. Trenchell, and the men and women attending this, there are hundreds of lives who likewise have fulfilled and even exceeded their potential to contribute to building and sustaining a culture that has proved the most successful in the history of mankind for the flourishing of human beings. And everyone wants his family, his or her family, and children to thrive. And I submit that what we're talking about is not really a question of the stresses on the safety net, the provision of food for the people who can't provide it for themselves, the provision of medical care, the jail, the detention services, keeping the community safe. This is about how we maintain and protect a culture that has been the most successful in the world. And that is what is at stake, too. So I'm grateful to you for having us here, for your hospitality in this great community, to show me that yet again, and to remind all of us that we must act. We must act. And the first thing we must do, I'm going to finish this way because I think everybody's got a responsibility to say, what are we going to do? Matt Gates summarized it correctly, that it is a question of will. And the first thing to preserve this culture we must do is we must restore order. And the best vehicle at hand, Chip Roy of Texas is not here today, can't be here today, but his H.R. 29, which says to the Secretary of Homeland Security, notwithstanding any other provision of law, with respect to every migrant that you encounter, you must detain or turn away. You cannot just release them into the country. You cannot continue doing this to all of our support services, our safety net on which our culture depends. You cannot do this to our culture, or we will surely face not only what you just, a shocking information you just mentioned, Supervisor Lyons, about the assassinations. I haven't heard that story, I'm afraid to say. But there was this, on January 5 of this year, in I think it's Calacua, Mexico, there was a war between the Sinaloa cartel and the Mexican army, with helicopter gunships firing against people on the ground and burning cars, blocking the entrances to the town so that the people were cowered in their homes. And that will occur in the United States of America if we do not get control of this problem. It sits squarely as a responsibility of the federal government, and we must have the will to act. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well done. Well done. Thank you. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Smarts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to be here today. I can tell you one thing, the great state of Indiana will stand with the great state of Arizona to protect your border. I can assure you. And people do care because it's not an issue of one state. It's a national security issue. And unfortunately, we can debate and deliberate and a lot of issues have disagreement, but we're always able to come together to protect our country. And this is a crisis. This is a national security crisis. It's unacceptable. It's unfortunate that my colleagues from this committee couldn't come here today to see what's really happening and how the impact of real life. But I just want to have a couple questions to this panel, And, I grew up in a communist totalitarian regime under mob, so, have lots of guns and ammunition. We have a constitutional carry in Indiana, so I am good to go, but that's not where we want to go. And I sometimes wonder, listen, if I would have come here illegally, I would really not have to go through all of the struggles I had to go for the last 23 years. So my question is for Dr. Trenchel. When I was listening to you, and I thought, okay, as a legal immigrant or legal citizen in this country, you have to pay for health care, you have to get insurance, you have to work and do all these different things. Isn't it we're creating perverse incentives, for people to come here legally? Because it's not just hurting people that try to be within the system, but actually you get a free ride, and we have now illegal immigration to welfare. So I would like you to comment on that.
I agree, and we're required by law to see all comers and to provide the same level of care we do to everyone else. And when a migrant comes in that crosses the border without insurance, without a payment plan, we give them the same health care we provide to the other residents of our community. And we have no ability to bill. We don't know where they're going. We don't know if their name is right. We don't know anything about them.
It's unfortunate that we start incentivizing lawlessness in our country. I have a question to the sheriff, and I think really, my colleagues on the other side always talking about this human trafficking and what was happening, and it's a humanitarian crisis too, because these people become slaves. It's like modern day slavery to cartels with a lot of big money made on these people. And I understand they're desperate, but we created perverse incentives. So I want you to comment on human trafficking and also on other issues of getaways, how dangerous it is.
No, I will use the word from the Yuma Border Patrol Chief. It's narco-slavery, every bit of it that we are seeing along our border, and it's going to the interior throughout the United States. There's indentured servitude in a lot of these states and counties because of the cartels controlling the narrative right now. So there's not been many sheriffs that I have ran into that have not had to investigate those types of crimes. We've seen in the past where you'd had indentured servitude discovered by Border Patrol agents happening in the Carolinas, 3,500 cases of children being used as recycled to get more people in. So we have seen the indentured servitude. If you can't pay, you're going to pay another way.
Well, thank you for your service, and I want to let you know we have a great sheriffs in the state of Indiana. If you need help, please let us know, because if we cannot fix it at the federal level, states can also step up and help each other. Mr. Lyons, some quick question, even though I have a little problem with being called flyover state, so I need to work on that, and I hopefully visit Indiana more often, because we have a lot of great things. It's a great state, as well as you have a great state here, too, as a farmer from flyover state, but actually farmer, I want to just have a quick question for you. Was what's happening right now with agriculture, and I was actually surprised in some of the numbers. Isn't really posed some issues with food safety and food security? What's really happening at the border?
So it's a challenge along the border, but our agriculture practices here in Yuma exceed the expectations and even the minimum standards or the maximum standards of any growers against any region in the United States. They have about a 500-page volume that they use. It's self-imposed to make sure, and they have hired people to watch over. We have had entry into fields, and at that point in time, depending upon what they've been able to locate, they either plow it under or remove it altogether.
But it would add that additional cost, which eventually
But it's
will be passed on
yes.
to consumer, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's extra cost that everyone has to do, because ultimately you have to be able to survive and pay money to be able to run your business.
Ms. Sparks, may I comment a little bit just on the narco trafficking of human trafficking? It was interesting, just before the China virus hit, the AP did a story, and they were talking about the LA basin specifically, but they estimated that between 65 and 75% of all manual labor was undocumented in the LA basin. And that remains a challenge and a problem today, because many of these people, as they come across the border, are still subject to the cartels to pay a debt and are indefinitely remanded to their service. They actually never leave.
I think it's unfortunate. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and I want to thank the people of Yuma for being here, too. We stand with the people of Yuma. My constituents are far, far away from here. They are in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, another farming community, another agriculture community. We have many ties that bind us to Yuma, but we also stand with you in protecting the national security of this country, making sure that we secure our border, and we will do everything in our power to do that. We recognize it as a national security crisis. The things that we have seen and heard here during this visit have reinforced that view. My decision to co-sponsor legislation that was introduced by Warren Davidson from Ohio to authorize the use of military force to ensure that, Sheriff, you have those resources that are needed to secure this border and make sure that the cartels do not continue their march into this country, into this community, and into our neighborhoods and our homes. We will make sure that you have those resources, sir. Thank you. But we did see some things that just show and demonstrate the brazenness of what is transpiring here in this community when it comes to the cartels. On the drive down to the border to San Luis Crossing, we had in our convoy cars that slowed down, that forced their way into our line of vans. And I didn't think anything of it. I thought someone was trying to exit. I couldn't figure it out. It was only today, after we realized that they were cartel members who were infiltrating our caravan to try and figure out what we were doing, what we were looking at. And just being able to have that close reinforce just what a security crisis this is on this side of the border. Sheriff, I've heard of cartel violence erupting similar to the cartel violence that's erupting across the border from Yuma in Texas, leading to members of the cartel actually escaping into the United States and asking for asylum. Have you ever seen that happen?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. And yes, Yuma has seen it, Cochise County has seen it, and Texas has seen it.
That is shocking, and just goes to show just how porous the border has become, how abused it is when cartel members themselves are creating the violence that's happening and then trying to escape the violence by taking advantage of the very laws that are protecting the citizens and enabling them. The lack of the enforcement by the Biden administration is enabling them to take advantage of those laws. Mr. Lyons, I want to follow up on a conversation we had a little bit earlier. My eyes have been opened to the breadth and depth of the impact of this porous border and this lack of enforcement by the Biden administration on society in Yuma, but also across this country, on districts like mine. We talked about the impact on hospitals. We went to the hospital. We saw the NICU. We saw the emergency room. We know that there's a finite number of beds, and that when there's a bed being occupied by someone here illegally, there's a bed not available to someone here legally, someone who is a resident of Yuma. But we talked about the food banks and the agriculture. We met with farmers. We listened to them talk about the impact of people, thousands of people crossing their fields, and just one incident taking away a whole entire set of acreage from being able to be harvested. But what other areas are we talking about here where this open border is having such an impact? Talk about the schools, talk about transportation, other areas.
Everything that you discussed has been a challenge, and most recently I had a call from an ESL teacher who said that she had a significant number of students being enrolled into her classes that did not speak either English or Spanish, and many of them Eastern European or Central Asian. And so there's a concern that we will continue to see that type of influx. For the most part, people have not been taking up residency in Yuma, so it was surprising to me that an ESL teacher was calling me to say, I now have a new challenge here in my classroom. And it wasn't something that she expected to confront.
But in terms of housing, in terms of jail, in terms of...
Well, the sheriff can speak specifically to the jail. I appreciate everything that he's done as a county supervisor, and we work hand in hand. His federal reimbursement is at 10%. So when he has cross-deputized the Border Patrol officers to go and assist because the U.S. Attorney General won't prosecute, he then... is faced with those challenges, and it's up to the county in order to make him whole. But, Sheriff, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Well, let me just
okay. Or Mr. Klein, sorry about that.
Wrap up and say, you know, I've been a prosecutor. I've used the ICE detainer process to have illegals who have committed crimes in Harrisonburg deported and made sure that the community is kept safe. I've talked to troopers who pull over vans on Interstate 81 in my district who encounter the human trafficking that crosses the border here in Yuma. I see the criminal aspect of it in my district, but never have my eyes been opened to the impact on healthcare, on education, on housing, on food, on agriculture that this porous border is having. And I'm going to go home with this information to ensure that we fight even harder to secure this border so that the people of Yuma are protected, but the people of the 6th Congressional District are protected. We stand with Yuma and we stand with our citizens. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, as I was sitting up here, first of all, great testimony all around. It really is, if you think about what these gentlemen and ladies are saying. I was thinking of how tired of it I am, how worn out of it I am, how tired I am of the president lying. And I know people don't like to say it that way. I'm a little rough around the edges. I don't care. He doesn't tell the truth. I'm tired of Secretary Mayorkas, even worse, because with the president, you can kind of tell when he's lying. He gets that weird look in his face, which is most of the time. Mayorkas will look you dead in the face. I used to be on the Homeland Security Committee. We interviewed him, I think, 3 times, and every time I would ask him, is there anything going on the border? Is anything wrong? Are there any problems? Anything we should do? He said, we fully have it under control. And then not long after, I would go to the border, and you would find that you actually watch the people illegally crossing and getting through. He just wouldn't face the facts. He wouldn't tell the truth. And I'm tired, to be honest with you, of Congress people. And I'm not always partisan. I'm not. But it happens to be on the other side of the aisle, not fulfilling their constitutional responsibility. They owe it to you to be here today. They owe it to America to debate these issues. They owe it to America to prove why what they've done is a good thing. And you know why they're not here? Because they can't prove it. Because they can't show it. Because they know it's bad. And to the gentleman over there, both Mr. Bishop, but all you guys actually said it. This is more. This is more than just Yuma. It's a big deal in Yuma. I know that. This is the United States of America under attack. We're losing our country. And if you think about it, I don't want to digress because we only have a certain amount of time and there's a couple questions I want to ask, but think what's gone on. There's all the stuff at the border, all over our border, which is now all over the country, by the way. I tell the folks in New Jersey, they say, gee, you're going all the way to Arizona. Because guess what? It's in New Jersey, too. People are dying of fentanyl. And guess what happens? It comes through the border. It's in Michigan. It's in New England. It is in Florida. It's everywhere. It's everywhere because of what these people did to a situation that we had fully under control. And I agree that you have those hearings. You have hearings for impeachment. I'm there. I'm voting for it. I've co-sponsored it with you, and I'm proud to do it because I really believe we have a case where somebody, Mayorkas, has committed treason, has broken the rule of law, and deserves not to be there anymore. What he's done is too bad. What we pay in taxes. Do you know how much this cost us? Billions upon billions of dollars. What we're doing to our kids, what our safety. You don't really have the words to say, but it's easy to fix. It was pretty much fixed. Get the fence up everywhere. Get the electronics that are needed up. Get the Remain in Mexico policy back. Get the immediate returns of illegals that do make it through right back to where they came from. Get agreements made with Mexico, and if they don't want to listen to the agreements, you make it clear, like it's been done in the past, that you're going to be in a lot of trouble trade-wise if you don't, so you better do it. We can do this. We're the most powerful nation still. We're working at demeaning ourselves, but we are still the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. And so it's time to stop it. It's time for us to move on. It's time for us to get back. It's time for us to bring our America home. So Supervisor John Lyons, cartels, let's just real quickly just make clear. I want people to understand. They make a relationship. It's almost like a contract with the people that they get across the border, which are a lot of them. And once they get across the border, they get them fixed up to go to a particular area in the United States, and then they own them, and then they push the fentanyl on your kids and my kids, whether it's in New Jersey, New York, or Arizona. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Spreading, how do I say this? We're spreading all this throughout the area, and I know we know the answer to this, has it gotten worse in the last 2 years? It's a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyhow.
There's no question that's stupid, right?
Yeah.
Just the unasked question. Mr. Van Drew, it has exceeded anything that we could have ever imagined. We've had more
Exactly.
than 600,000 people come through Yuma since this administration took
So
office.
we get this administration in, they make you just do a lot of paperwork. We don't protect our people. We don't protect our Americans. Things have gotten worse. Cost to the hospital. And again, I know you said it, but I want everybody to really think about this. Is anybody helping?
No.
No, doctor, they're not.
No, they're not.
And you know what? When you go in with your maternity and your maternity patients, guess what? It's the job, and they're doing a good job, of health professionals and nurses. They have to take care of the people that are sickest first. That's just the Hippocratic Oath. They've got to take care of those people. But guess who's waiting with their children? Guess who's waiting with their families? Guess who's paying for all of it? You know the answer. Am I correct, doctor?
Yes, you are.
Am I correct that your nurses had to go out and buy safety seats for these people because we used so many in the last big tranche of folks that came over, and they went out and the hospital had to pay for them, and they had to go everywhere in the area to buy safety seats because they didn't have any. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Is it true that when we spoke today to the food bank, that she told us that some of the people, believe it or not, that were illegals and had come over, expressed dissatisfaction with the food? Is that true?
Yes,
I'm not making this stuff up.
Yes,
right?
Mr. Van
I'm
Drew,
so
that's-
tired and worn out of it, and so are you. We're tired of it. $26 million you're in the hole, right? Who's going to pay for that? I'm looking at you. Americans. So it is time to change. It is time we had a real secretary that did a real job. It's time we had, a real president. And it's time we have congressmen. Guess what? These guys would go into any meeting, no matter how much of a disadvantage you think you are, to really talk the issues. When you believe in something, when it's in your heart, when you know it's right, you're going to stand up and you're going to fight for it. They can't, because you know what they know? At the end of the day, they're hurting our American people, and they're hurting America, and it has to come to an end. I thank you guys so much for what you did. And Sheriff, thank you for what you do. I know you guys put your lives on the line all the time. People are dying. People are getting hurt. This isn't just some imaginary thing like we're, damn it, I hope we have those impeachment hearings. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Alabama recently, I was told that in Birmingham, we seized enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in my entire state. And so I tell everybody this may be affecting border communities, but it's a crisis for our entire nation. And so we're going to try to address it. And Sheriff, this is my third trip down, and so I want to talk a little bit, some things that just kind of stuck out when I was asking the agents along the border that kind of concerned me, and really kind of, as I talk about it, it's something that kind of, it strikes a chord with a lot of people. But you were saying earlier that the price that you're seeing now to come across the southern border, it's ranging from $6,000 to $15,000. Is that correct?
In Yuma County, yes, sir.
Now, who's getting that money, Sheriff?
The cartels.
The cartels. So when I was a few years ago, of course, we talk about inflation, the money we print, everything's gone up. But a few years ago, I heard it was $4,000 just south of the southern border, and then the Triangle Nations further south. We had a price for Syria of up to $20,000. Are y'all seeing some high prices from other countries around the globe as well?
That's my understanding, yes, sir. When you're looking at Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Russia has been an increase where I think Border Patrol, roughly 70 a day was the number that they were encountering just from Russia.
What's the price on a Russian now coming across the border?
I wouldn't think that it would be that much, yes, sir.
I would imagine. I don't know. I haven't heard the Russian price. We actually seized some Chinese nationals, the Sheriff's Department in Texas, and it was $80,000 each. Folks, they're not coming here to do us any favors, just so you know. No. But, Sheriff, my question now, you said that, so we got a price. What about if somebody, have you guys heard, and maybe other law enforcement officers would know too, What if they don't have the money to pay the cartel? What are the options then?
So the option is that it's indentured servitude, slavery. They're going to be sent to a certain location, and I found pieces of paper down on the border that list the location that they are to go to, and that's where they will work off their debt, depending on what you're capable of doing.
Wait now, Sheriff. So you're telling me that Biden's policies on the southern border are actually creating American or slaves from around the globe? Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow. So the Democrats who accuse us of all the awful things that we do, they are actually enforcing policies now that are creating slaves in this country.
It's lending to that right now.
So not only are they creating slaves, but I also heard, and I found this rather intriguing when I was on the border, if somebody was coming across the border and they actually didn't have the money and they didn't want to be an indentured servant, is it true that they can backpack now heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine and pay that passage? Is that an option as well?
That is an option.
So the Democrats' policies, two things now. So they're creating slaves and drug mules. Is that where we're going with this? No wonder they don't want to come talk about it, right? So now that we've got this issue of slaves and drug mules, I want to change over a little something I saw. And you guys, this is troubling to me. Is I went to Fort Bliss, the Emergency Intake Center. You guys heard of this? Fort Bliss, to handle all the unaccompanied minors coming to this country. And as I was there, the admiral's running it, and I'm like, sir, why don't we send these kids, these are unaccompanied minors now, back to their home country, back to their town? And the admiral said, well, they don't know where they came from. So these kids were from, I saw one, I know he's probably no more than 5. And I saw some probably, the average was 16, 17-year-olds. So they're saying these kids, these unaccompanied minors, do not know where they came from. I said, well, where are we going to send them to? Oh, we're going to send them to a Google address in the United States of America. Then we don't background check the people we're sending them to. So one of my friends here, I remember earlier, hit on this. We are actually, with taxpayer dollars, are now trafficking children, and we're paying to get them there on American taxpayer dollars and put them in God knows what and God knows where. And so the thing that really, I think Andy Biggs has mentioned this, Rep. Biggs, is, y'all, we've lost 20,000 children. Mayorkas said himself in a hearing he does not know where 20,000 of these children are. And that's just staggering to me. So Sheriff, have you, as you begin, is it mostly heroin and cocaine now and fentanyl, or is it just mostly fentanyl?
Unfortunately for Arizona and California right now, we're the worst and the top as far as fentanyl, and below that is methamphetamine. And to address your other comment, what you're looking at is a ploy by the cartels marketing a way to work with Mayorkas on the reunification policy that he put into place. So if you send your child across as a child that's by themselves, then you can be reunified when you come at a later date and time. So the cartels are exploiting every policy that this administration has put into play.
And it's almost like they're better at the game than we are, right? I mean, they know before we know what's happening. I know that they're talking about the new rules that the Biden administration won't enforce, and basically that just adds another step. But my understanding last night, I was talking to one of the border agents, is once the illegals, when they cross into the country, they want that MTA, that motion to appear in court. Is that correct? Now, Mr. Lyons, could you tell me for sure, when they get this MTA, does that automatically qualify them for benefits?
Yes, it does.
So you're telling me they come into the country, they turn themselves in, and then they get the MTA, and they are qualified for benefits from the American taxpayer?
Yes, sir.
Do we have any idea how much those benefits run, or any idea? Have you heard that, Mr. Lyons?
Up to $800 a month.
$800 a month. And so I understand, too, we give them a cell phone.
Yes, we do.
Have y'all heard that we actually give them a cell phone? My kids would probably rather come across the border, honestly, sometimes.
Yes, sir.
So we give them a cell phone that they can jailbreak and use it however they want. My understanding. Go ahead, Lyons. I'm waiting. I want to hear what you got to say.
Well, it was just they give them that phone so that they know where they're at. But we have a 95% failure rate to appear for those motions.
So you mean they take our phones, but they don't take our phone calls? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, sir. Yes, it's the worst state.
Man, that does sound like my kids.
Yes.
Now, Doc, one last thing, and then we'll get off, and I'll give Mr. Jordan. I didn't have a time over here, Jim. Am I over time?
You're definitely over
Benefits
time.
continue,
I'm
Mr.
definitely
Moore.
over time.
But the benefits continue.
The chairman says I'm definitely over time.
You
So,
can
Doc,
answer last question.
Last question, Doc. So, 100% of the immigrants, when you deliver the children, you have to give them car seats. I understand. So, because the federal government requires you. Isn't there some rule that says you can't send a child away from hospital without a car seat?
Correct. CMS rule, we cannot do that.
So we're buying all the car seats as we send them on the way and paying for all the health care, and you're $26 million in debt, basically.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Nels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Dr. Trenchell and Mr. Lyons for your leadership in this community. You're doing a great job going to visit that hospital. My oldest daughter just graduated from Tech. Of course, Sheriff Wilmot, it's good to see you. I see Sheriff Lamb there and all the other sheriffs. Thank you all for your service. Some of you know that I served in law enforcement for 30 years. I was a sheriff in Fort Bend County, Texas for 8 years before I decided to run for the swamp. I will never forget where I came from. I am with you. I support the thin blue line. So Sheriff Wilmot, in our first hearing, we had a hearing a couple weeks ago. Some of my colleagues mentioned on the Biden border crisis. We had a Democrat witness there. He was the El Paso county judge, and he testified, and I quote, "There is no invasion of migrants in our community, nor are there hordes of undocumented immigrants committing crimes against citizens or causing havoc in our community," end quote. I was able to quickly discredit his testimony by producing numerous articles of crime in his community as a result of this invasion. And then I also did a quick search, Sheriff, of crime here in Yuma. I point out one here, a former gang member arrested by border agents in Yuma. This guy was a gang member, convicted felon, been arrested by border agents in Yuma. An illegal immigrant was arrested for entering U.S. from Mexico. He's 25 years old, was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon in Santa Barbara, California. Served 3 years now, served 3 years in prison, which was enhanced for being a criminal street gang. After completing his sentence, he was removed from the U.S., and he will be prosecuted for re-entry. So this guy's coming back. No problem, he can just come back. I highlight this guy here. He's the alleged migrant killer arrested after a 4-month run. Sheriff, you mentioned this guy in some of your testimony. He killed, I guess, somebody on his way up here. Folks, you don't want this guy to be your neighbor. You don't want this guy in your neighborhood at all. Just another guy, and this was here on January 17th of 2023. You arrested him 4 months later at the Yuma County Detention Facility for second-degree murder, after having been arrested by border agents for trying to come back into the U.S. This child molester here, he was caught hiding in the brush. Again, February 17, 2022. He was a child abuser, convicted child abuser from Honduras. You arrested him, took him to Yuma here for processing, looked at his record, Montgomery County, Maryland Circuit, convicted Vargas in December of 2009. First and second degree child abuse of fracturing the skull of a newborn while babysitting for his girlfriend. He got 7 years, served 7 of the 25 years in Maryland before being placed on supervisory probation. Removed to Honduras in 2018, and now here he is coming back. And this just goes on and on. 1,400 border crossers charged with coming back, re-entry. It just goes on. Sheriff, I want to ask you the same question I asked our former witness. Are the aliens crossing illegally, committing crimes across this country?
Absolutely.
Joe Biden, are you listening? Mayorkas, are you listening to the sheriffs?
No, they are not.
Sheriff, you have, in some of your written testimony, in some of your written testimony, Sheriff, you talk a little bit about the rise in crime due to Biden's border crisis. How has it impacted your agency with response times and resources? I mean, my guys were chasing criminals all over my county and the whole southwest Houston area. How has it affected your ability to keep these people in your community safe?
Thank you for the question, sir. In regards to our response times, when we have to respond out and do a rescue out in the desert, which is about 40 or 50 miles away from civilization, that ties up our resources from doing their normal service delivery to the community that we serve. When we're processing the crime scenes out in the desert, when we're investigating the calls of the thefts, the burglaries, the rapes, the delayed rapes and robberies that happen to some of the immigrants coming to the border that we have to handle, it taxes your resources and otherwise takes away our ability to do the proactive enforcement versus reactive.
And what we all know in this room, what we all have witnessed under former President Donald J. Trump, the greatest president in my lifetime, that border crossings were down, yes. Border crossings were down, and our country was proud to uphold the rule of law. When you look at our United States Constitution, and you see that it's the federal government's responsibility to secure our southern borders. We could talk about it. I sent a letter to Biden calling him to invoke that guarantee clause. And if you don't understand, if you look at Article 4, Section 4, there's an invasion clause, folks, and I'll just read for the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republic form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. We are being invaded, yes? Article 1, Section 10, State Self-Defense Clause, reserves to the states the sovereign power to repeal an invasion and defend their citizenry from the overwhelming and imminent danger. Your Attorney General is doing a hell of a job. Our Attorney General is doing well as well in Texas, trying to invoke it. But let's just say this. The American people are the victims here. We are the victims. We must take the fight to the cartels, to the enemy, and we must use extreme prejudice to eliminate them off the face of the earth. I yield back.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here. I appreciate you, Chairman, holding this hearing right here at the center of our border crisis. To the good people of Yuma, thank you for having us. Thank you for showing us. I'm a freshman, so this has been incredibly eye-opening for me. You know, Mr. Chairman, I remember my first committee hearing this year, first one ever, when the ranking member said that we were imagining a border crisis. My first question to the good people of Yuma, are you imagining a border crisis? Is the border secure here in Yuma? Has the border gotten worse under President Biden? And final question, do you think this administration has faithfully executed their obligation to secure that border? No. We got a hell no. Thank you to the panel. From the short time we've been here in Yuma, one thing is very crystal clear to me, and is that President Biden's open door, open border policy is an abject failure to the people of this country. We have seen firsthand the prioritization by this administration of illegal immigrants over the people of America. Illegal immigration, obviously, you know this here in Yuma more than anyone else. It deprives your community of safety in your homes and in your community, of health care, it costs the taxpayers billions of dollars. It destroys property, farmers, where are you at? And it destroys families through fentanyl poisoning. Congressional Democrats should be here, Mr. Chairman. It's actually a shame that we were imagining a border crisis, but everything that we've seen thus far proves exactly that we are not, that you see it. And of course, in my home state of South Carolina, as has been talked about, we are a border state. Myrtle Beach is not just famous for its beaches and Chinese spy balloons. It also has record fentanyl overdoses that happen year after year. The first question to the sheriff, what federal policies were in place under the prior administration that really helped, in your opinion, secure that border?
You know, and I thank you for that question, because I also told Secretary Mayorkas the same thing. The Operation Streamline was 100% prosecution for anybody that entered this country between a port of entry and denied them the access.
Would you say that the Biden administration has been able to control the cartels in 2 years?
No, sir.
What policies do you think promote or enable the cartels to act more freely across the border or even in our country?
Well, when they removed the migrant protection protocols that were put into place, plus Operation Streamline, and they got away from any kind of prosecution at all, that just enabled the cartels to do what they're doing today, and they continue to escalate in their capabilities.
Mr. Lyons, you tweeted back in January that the border was 100% not secure, that it was wide open. Do you believe that still to be the case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in both you and the sheriff's experience, what are you seeing from real-world impacts that you're hearing from people out here in the community that are happening from a crime perspective or a cartel perspective in their homes or neighborhoods?
We've had some home invasions. Those were few and far between just because Border Patrol has been able to interdict. Yesterday morning, one of the farmers you heard from this morning testified that his daughter was returning home from feeding her 4-H project and was almost hit by a van full of people being smuggled across the border. So we continue to see those types of instances. He's had 2 of those experiences in the last 6 months. One of the things that I apologize, but I should have addressed when Mr. Klein asked, but it's been a negative impact in our community, is the ability of 911 services to respond adequately. And that's been a severe challenge. I met with the first responders from every group in Yuma, and they shared with me their concern or the ability to be able to respond when they continue to receive a high volume of 911 calls from the border. Now, not all of those people were actually looking for medical assistance. They were simply tired of waiting to be processed because they had somewhere to go and someplace to be. So that has affected the people of this community. And I was absolutely blown away to hear them tell me that. They do not care about the value of life, and that is something directly related to the cartels.
Sheriff, what instances have you heard from the residents here in Yuma of crime or cartel activity? Talk about that. Have you heard these similar instances?
Absolutely, sir, and you can refer to my document that I submitted as well. My jail already this last year had over 55 individuals booked into custody that had entered this country illegally and committed sexploitation of minors, the trespassing, the smuggling of narcotics, not only for use but for sale and trade. That's the majority of what I have in my jail right now for those kind of offenses.
Mr. Fry, over at Amberley's place, our youngest victim coming in for a sexual assault was 10 years old. The challenge is that we don't know in which country it occurred and by whom. So we're able to collect the data, but because of jurisdictional challenges, there's no one to prosecute. So a 10-year-old was violated by someone under cartel control or by the cartel itself. And just here at Morales Dam, Congressman Biggs and I have had the opportunity to walk around and pick up Plan B, and that was an area commonly referred to as the rape tree. So many people coming across were victims of the cartel where they exacted that last price and denied them their dignity.
Thank you to the panel for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Hagan.
Thank you. Others have asked you questions. There have been some excellent questions today, and you've provided some incredibly helpful testimony. I'd like to take a little bit different approach. And I want you to know that I think that maybe you believe here in Yuma and along the border that you've been forgotten, that we don't care. But you haven't. We do care, and it's why we're here. We read the statistics, we see the film on the 5 o'clock news, we hear about the fentanyl deaths, and we have some awareness of the human trafficking across our borders and spreading across our country. But reading about it is fundamentally different than being here and seeing it for ourselves and in talking to you about what you've been experiencing. I want you to know that everyone on this committee has heard you, they're listening, and they want to represent you. They want to represent your voices. They want to hear what you have to say. I want to thank this entire community for your candor, I want to thank you for your willingness to talk to us and engage with us and to show us what you're dealing with. I want to thank your growers and producers for providing us with fresh and healthy food and for creating the beautiful Eden and oasis carved out of the surrounding desert. Thank you to our law enforcement, our sheriffs, our border patrol, and our police officers. And thank you to our local business owners and community leaders for what you do. But again, I want to be your voice, and to do that, I'm going to read to you some of the notes that I have taken just in the last day or so in visiting with the folks that we've had the opportunity to talk to. Now, you've heard some of this information, but I want to make it very, very clear. These are not Republican talking points. These are not an effort to just attack the Biden administration for the sake of attacking the Biden administration. These are my notes of my conversation with your fellow citizens. As we've already talked about, there's $26 million in uncompensated care for illegal immigrants in just 1 year. There is no payer source for those fees. And the folks that come here are sick. Not all of them, but a lot of them. They have hypertension, they need dialysis, they need heart surgery, and they need intensive care. 25% of illegal babies ending up here that are born here end up in NICU because they don't have any prenatal care. We have to assure that we give a safe discharge, is what our medical professionals told us, which means that they have to provide wheelchairs and walkers and transportation. They may have to make contact with a family member. And none of the NGOs that are working with the Biden administration to further this agenda have offered to pay these costs, and the feds have refused. You cannot discharge a baby without a car seat, and so basically the hospital's been out purchasing car seats throughout the entire surrounding area. But many of these babies have brothers and sisters that also need car seats, so they may end up buying 2 and 3 car seats for the same family. The hospitals has essentially had to set up a hotel upstairs because they can't discharge the patients. They had one baby in NICU for almost 2 months, so the mother had to live there as well. There are lots of signs of abuse with the female migrants that are coming across. It is a federal law that the facility treats everyone who comes to the hospital. In other words, the federal government requires you to provide care, but refuses to pay you for it. The ultimate in an unfunded mandate. You've had illegal immigrants in ICU for over 30 days, some as long as 90 days. You've had to transfer residents to other places as there have been times when there aren't enough ICU beds because the illegals are taking them. It takes 2 to 3 times the amount of resources to take care of an illegal as it does a resident. One woman at the hospital very compassionately noted that a loss of 1 person to fentanyl is 1 too many. In other words, they're very compassionate about what you're dealing with. But the illegals, the increase in illegal immigration has coincided with an increase in fentanyl overdoses. When Trump was president, there were 810 people seeking asylum in 2020. In 2021, it had gone up to 110,000, and in 2022, it was 310,000. And that's just in the Yuma sector alone. These people are processed here, and then they're sent to communities throughout the entire country, as the cartels are telling them where they must go in order to pay back what they have to pay to be brought across to the United States. The CBP has essentially become a concierge service for illegal immigrants. You have aliens from over 100 different countries entering this area. The cartels are controlling all aspects of the border. They earned $3.2 billion last year in human trafficking. The Biden administration is jeopardizing our food supply and our food security. And they're prioritizing illegal aliens over and above American citizens and legal immigrants. These are real life facts told to us and as expressed by real life citizens from this very community. And again, I will say it, you're not forgotten. We will never make life better in foreign countries by destroying the United States of America. We will never make foreign leaders do a better job of taking care of their poor or prosecuting their criminals by sending them across the border illegally. We must protect our borders. We must recognize that citizenship matters, and we must enforce the law. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Sheriff, could you please summarize the ways that the cartels are involved in illegal border crossings?
So you have the Jalisco New Generation in Baja California, then you have the Sinaloa cartel in Sonora, Mexico on our very southern border. So the Jalisco New Generation, theirs is the movement of bodies that are coming across the river corridor. So they are the ones that are coordinating. They actually have contacts in different countries that have been identified as being the travel agents, for lack of a better term, to get the people here and to be able to control that coming across. So right now, between midnight and 4 a.m., 40 at a time come across down by the river corridor. So the Sinaloa cartel, they are the ones that are doing the narcotic side of it. So they coordinate between those that can afford and cannot afford to be able to pay the price. And they utilize those people to smuggle the narcotics in, whether it's on a vehicle through the port of entry or whether it's through the remote deserts of our county.
Thank you. So would it be fair to say that the relaxation of border policies has redounded to the benefit of the cartels?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just to be blunt, it's been a bonanza for them, right? It's expanded their business opportunities for their criminal enterprises, has it not?
Absolutely, and they have scouts that are in our mountains so they can watch Border Patrol's actions out in the remote part of our desert, so they can coordinate the loads getting through, whether they're human or narcotics.
So we know who's benefiting, and so then we have to ask, who's paying the price? Well, first, of course, is the victims of fentanyl. In 2020, Border Patrol seized 4,800 pounds. 2021, it was 11,200. 2022 fiscal year, it was 14,700. And in just the first 4 months for the 2023 fiscal year, 12,500. I have a chart here showing basically a quadrupling in overdoses here in Yuma just over the course of a few years. And of course, this is not a localized matter. Throughout the country, fentanyl poisoning is now the leading cause of death for young people, more than car accidents, more than suicides, more than anything. Sheriff, is it your opinion that fewer Americans would be dying of fentanyl poisoning if the border was as secure as it was at the start of this administration?
Absolutely.
In addition to the victims of fentanyl, we then have the victims of human trafficking as well. Supervisor, I believe we discussed earlier some evidence that you've seen of the increases in the impact of human trafficking here in Yuma.
Yeah, so in the first 3 months, we've seen a 350% uptick in human trafficking, people who have come forward seeking assistance on their own, who have declared that they have been trafficked. And if 9 were willing to do it, I'm sure that there are many more out there looking to free themselves of that bondage.
Sheriff, is it your opinion that fewer people would be suffering through the horror of human trafficking if the border was as secure as it was at the start of this administration?
Absolutely.
And then we have the migrants themselves. In 2022, 856 died attempting to cross the border. That was 300 more than it was in 2021, and 3 times as many as it was just in 2020. Sheriff, is it your opinion that fewer migrants would be dying crossing the border if the border was as secure as it was at the start of this administration?
Yes, sir.
So there you have it. We have a set of policies that has been a bonanza for the cartels, for foreign criminal organizations, and this windfall is being underwritten by pain and suffering and death. That's why this is not a partisan issue. You know, usually we have to weigh costs and benefits, we have to adjudicate competing values, but here it's just bad all the way around. It's negative on both sides of the ledger. And so how does this make any sense? Well, it really only makes sense when you look at it from a political perspective. We had a set of border policies that was working. Everyone here will tell you that. And this administration came into office, and in order to make a political statement, not only reversed those policies, but swung the pendulum radically in the other direction, exploding whatever bipartisan consensus there was on this issue and ushering in a crisis unlike we have seen in American history. So I'm not interested in criticizing our colleagues on the other side of the dais for not being here. I want to encourage them to come here, talk to the supervisor, talk to the sheriff, talk to the hospital, see what we have seen, and I want to work with anyone who is interested in getting this crisis under control. That includes the president, who I implore to accept responsibility, to admit his policies have failed, to find a new Secretary of Homeland Security. And let's all work together to replace pro-cartel policies with pro-America policies.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Mr. Lyons, who benefits? That seems to me to be the fundamental question, right? Who benefits? We talked earlier on January 20th, 2021, first day, President Biden says no more wall, no more remain in Mexico, no more detain and deport. And the result, Sheriff told us what the result is. I think from his testimony, he said 2 years ago, this was the safest border county in the country. Today, we have what's been described here in the last 2 hours.
Yes,
so
sir.
it sort of raises the fundamental, who benefits from this border that's no longer a border, from this open border chaos on our southern border? Who benefits from that? Does our healthcare system benefit,
No,
Mr.
sir.
Lyons?
No, directly benefiting the cartels.
Does our law enforcement benefit, Sheriff Wilmot?
No, sir.
How about first responders, Supervisor? Does first responders, does that benefit? How about the taxpayers? How about the growers and ranchers and farmers that we heard from earlier? Do they benefit from this chaotic policy that was put in place on day one? How about the legal residents? How about the citizens? Do they benefit?
No.
That's the takeaway here. That's that. How about now? Who does benefit though? Do the cartels benefit, Supervisor Lyons?
Yes, sir.
100%. Do the drug dealers benefit?
100%.
Yeah. And the scary thing is, the sad thing is too, many times the people who are being trafficked across, they don't really benefit either. The things that happen to women, things that happen to kids, we've talked about that. So this is the crazy thing. And this brings us back to what my colleague and friend from Florida said early in today's hearing. I don't think they're going to change. I don't think Joe Biden's going to change, because any administration that puts in policies that harm the citizens, harm law enforcement, harm the taxpayers, harm the farmers, harm the ranchers, harm everyone, it seems, and only benefit the bad guys, the cartels and drug dealers, I don't know that they're going to change without a fight.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that it's good to remember that the source of all fentanyl, and that's being shipped directly from China to the cartels to come and poison the people in the United States.
Yep. And here's, I would just add this to it as well. And this was in your testimony, Supervisor. In your testimony, you were asked by, I believe by Mr. Gates, I think you said Secretary Mayorkas lied to your face. That was your testimony here today, under oath, here today. You took the oath when we swore you in. You said so if you have an administration that you pay for, your tax dollars pays for the federal government, they come here, they promise to work with local government, work with the local community to better the situation, and then don't deliver on their promise. The only way we're going to fix this is a fight. And the way our system works is when you have split government, you have to do it on the appropriations bills. We are going to have to attach on the appropriation bills, say, look, if you don't start enforcing the law, as Mr. McClintock pointed out, if you don't start enforcing the law, we're not going to fund certain things. I mean, not our law enforcement, not Border Patrol, we need that, but other things, we're going to have to do that if we're going to remedy this situation.
Yes, sir.
That's how bad it is. That's how serious it is. And we came here today to just underscore and hear from people who've been living it now for 2 long years, to hear from you all so we can go back and tell our colleagues, look, we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight for the good people of Yuma County, the good law enforcement folks in Arizona, people providing health care, the mayor of this great town, and, as our other members have pointed out, folks all over the country, because every country is now impacted by 5 million illegal migrants coming into our country in the past 2 years. And that's what we pledge to do. So I want to thank you all for being here today. We're going to close with our, the gentleman who represents this fine community for 5 minutes, who's been a good friend of mine in Congress for a number of years, does an outstanding job of serving the folks of his great district here in Arizona. Mr. Gosar is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So I'm going to hit two things. I'm going to try to hit this a little differently. It's been alluded to by some of my colleagues. Ben Franklin was asked, what kind of government did you give us? A republic if you can keep it. And what is key to a republic? The rule of law, accountability, and defined defensible borders. Now let's take an example of one of those republics that fell. Rome. They actually invited the conquered to conquer. Now think about that. Think about that. And the reason I bring that up is that we've been bamboozled by the other side and the press. But there's only 10 or 11 million illegals in this country. That's not true. The Ivy League study in 2014, 2015 showed that there was between 33 and 36 million. You add another 6 million that has come across during this tenure, you're over 40 million illegals. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, in a population of 360 million, maybe 10 million doesn't really make much of a difference. But when it's 40 or 50 million, they're changing culture. That's where this is going. Changing culture. Now, the other thing is I keep hearing over and over again, what can you do about it? As has been alluded, we're one of the three stools. Well, there's the power of the purse. The chairman actually just brought this up. That fight's coming. That was part of the fight that the 20 held out for, to get that rules changed. But it's even better than that. We have an opportunity that if they were never authorized by Congress, that we can defund them. This is going to be so much fun. Can you say ATF? Can you say OPT? So now we take the fight to them. And why is this important? Because we have to have that power of the purse. That also means that we have to get rid of the national emergency on COVID. It seems kind of strange that I'm bringing this up. But when you're under a national emergency, the executive branch has 120 additional powers. And one of them is to move money around. So let me share with you an example. Congress, in its wisdom a year and a half ago, authorized $2.some billion to go to COVID testing. It disappeared. It was rerouted by the administration for illegal immigration housing. Now let's step back. This last fall, there was an omnibus bill of $1.7 trillion passed. And it was passed intentionally under the COVID national emergency. That means that, succinctly, not one of those dollars that Congress is obliged to spend has to be spent that way. Not that it will, but I hope I'm sharing with you that they get a lot more latitude. And so that power of the purse has to return. Okay? So we also have to do our job. In the national emergency, would you be surprised to find out that once a declaration of a national emergency occurs, that Congress shall, no later than 6 months later, convene to decide whether to continue that national emergency or kill it. I dropped that bill twice. Ms. Pelosi killed it twice. So the magic about this is that once you start the process, it has to go through. It's a privileged motion. So we've actually enabled our Senate minority to actually take this up because we've already passed it out of the House. So play smarter, not harder. The appropriations process is going to be the big fight. You got a debt ceiling. You got these appropriations. Finding these programs, rules, agencies that were not authorized by Congress is a good step in the right direction. Because we have to get back the levity of equal justice under the law. We've been asleep at the wheel for a long period of time, folks. We saw this in the Obama administration. The Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS. Countless. Who's paid the penalty for it? Nobody's paid the penalty for it. And that they can do this to a president, they throw everything at him, and not one thing has been found on the guy. That's one of the founding principles that's failing now in our republic. So trust is a series of promises kept. I hope that you'll look at us. And when appropriation season comes, they told us they were going to march up there. They were going to get the power of the purse because maybe we can earn your trust again. I'm going to end because I'm a person of accountability. I do animes. I take for full responsibility for those things. So I believe that there has to be a personal touch to this. So let me go through the roster of who's not here. Mr. Nadler from New York, Miss Lofgren from California, Miss Jackson Lee from Texas, Mr. Cohen from Tennessee, Mr. Johnson from Georgia, Mr. Schiff from California, Mr. Cicilline from Rhode Island, Mr. Swalwell from California, Mr. Liu from California, Miss Jayapal from Washington, Mr. Correa from California, Miss Macbeth from Georgia, Miss Dean from Pennsylvania, Miss Escobar from Texas, Miss Ross from North Carolina, Miss Bush from Missouri, and Mr. Ivey from Maryland. Until we start putting names and holding people accountable, we're not going to get anywhere close to our goal. We the people. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Chairman, for the privilege of sitting in and
thank you.
Charging your parade.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you, Paul. I would just close by reminding everyone it's a great country. My favorite scripture verse, 2 Timothy 4:7. Paul is the old guy giving advice to the young guy, Timothy, and he says what? Fight the good fight, finish the course, keep the faith. I tell people I love that verse because of the action in it. It's not a sissy, wimpy verse. It's an American verse. Words of actions. Americans aren't timid people. We are people who get the job done. We fight, we finish, we keep faith with the principles that made our country special. That verse characterizes this community, and we have so appreciated your hospitality over the last 24 hours. The mayor, the supervisor, the hospital administrator, the sheriff, and everyone else we've had a chance to visit with, the border patrol agents, law enforcement, first response, all the folks we've got a chance to visit with. You are living that verse here, and we appreciate it, and we owe you that same kind of commitment in the United States Congress. You pay our salary. We're supposed to fight for you. Your two guys from Arizona are definitely doing that. The rest of us need to do the same. And we pledge to you that we will. We understand how serious this situation is. I'll finish with this final story. I share this all the time because it had an impact on my wife and I. This is probably 10, 12 years ago. We lived north of Dayton, Ohio, near the town of Urbana. And about 12 years ago, we had some good friends of ours in Dayton. Said, are you guys free for dinner? It was the summertime of the year. And they said, yeah. They said, well, come down. We're going to meet them and meet us down here at our place in the Dayton area. We're going to go out to dinner. They said, before we go to dinner, we're going to tour the Wright brothers' home. And we said, great. We like history. We like, seeing that. We live in the house we raised our family in was built in 1837, and we liked old things in history. He said, sure. So we go down there. We pay the lady at the door with the Historical Society like $5, and they take you on a tour of this home, and you learn all kinds of neat things about these two amazing Americans. You learn about the bicycle shop. You learn about the things they tinkered and built and the stuff they did and all the things they were into. And it's a fascinating tour. And the tour ends in Wilbur Wright's bedroom, and they tell you a few more things about this particular Wright brother, and then they finish the tour by showing you two pictures. First picture they hold up was that very first flight, 1903, in this thing they called a plane in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And when you see that picture, your first thought was, wow, how did that thing get off the ground? How did that contraption fly? And the truth is it barely did. It flew like 100 feet, got like 10, 12 feet off the ground. And they show you that picture, and you're like, okay, that's kind of neat, because you sort of remember that from when they taught you that in school, 7th, 8th grade, whenever you learned that. You're like, okay, that's kind of neat. They put that picture down, and then they hold up a second picture. 1947, Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier in a jet. And I was like, wow, that I didn't know. I must not have been paying attention that day in school or so. I didn't know that. And I think that's amazing. In 44 years, we go from two guys flying 100 feet in this jalopy contraption of a thing they called a plane to another great American breaking the sound barrier in a jet. It's amazing. And they put that picture down. That was the end of the tour. And Polly and I start walking out. As we're walking out, I thought, wait a minute. Why did they stop there? I represent Wapakoneta, Ohio, hometown of Neil Armstrong, who 22 years later stepped on the moon. Think about it. 66 years. We go from two guys flying 100 feet to another American stepping on the moon. One lifetime. This country did that. And I would argue no other country is capable of doing that. Only this nation, the greatest country ever. You can't fault people for wanting to come here. They just got to do it legally. And that's what we're going to fight for and make sure the law is enforced. Thank you all very much. Our committee is adjourned.
Good job, Tim. Thanks.